Yeah, so first of all, thanks everybody for being to our session, both on Zoom and in person. This session is meant to highlight how computing relates to health, and I wanted to make it as broad as I could. I am Mihai Pop. I'm a professor in computer science here. I'm a computational biologist, so I work on one area of health through primarily genomic analyses, but as you'll see, each of our panelists covers different areas of the whole healthcare system. So I think that's particularly exciting, highlighting how computing is supporting everything that we do related to healthcare, biohealth in general. Also, I think 3 of our panelists are alumni of the department, so and I wanted to also make sure that I highlight how much our department has actually contributed over the past 50 years to promoting various computing research and computing applications in health. So I'll start by introducing the panelists in the order from my side there. So first of all, Luika Rashid, she's a Dean's Professor in the Smith School of Business, and she's also a member of UMIAC's Institute for Advanced Computer Studies, as well as an affiliate professor in computer science. She's a co-founder and member of the CLIP Lab, that is the Computational Linguistics and Information Processing Lab at the University of Maryland. She has over 3 decades of experience in data science as made pioneering contributions towards meeting data integration and data management challenges in multiple non-traditional domains that include life sciences and health sciences, humanitarian disaster relief applications, human behavior modeling within social streams, and the modeling and management of financial ecosystem. She's a fellow of the Association for Computing Machinery and the IEEE, which I never remember what this stands for. Institute for, I think, Electrical and Electronics Engineers, if I'm not mistaken. I've also asked each of the panelists to give me one fun fact about themselves, so it's not just all about their accomplishments, but many things you might not know about them if you just look them up on the website. Luika mentioned that her research has been driven by disasters. When there was this big tsunami, I don't remember when, but to me it's recent, but it's 2003, it's not that recent anymore, led to research in disaster data management. In 2008, there was a big financial crisis, which led Luika to explore financial ecosystem and supply chain. And COVID-19 led her into looking at the public health infrastructure. And our next panelist is Akash Magoon. Akash is the co-founder and CEO of Adonis, a revenue intelligence and automation platform for medical practices and hospitals. Prior to that, Akash served as co-founder and CTO at Naya, an AI platform for insurance benefits. Akash has raised over $130 million in venture capital across his 2 companies and was named Forbes 30 Under 30. Akash is a computer science graduate from University of Maryland here and of our department. He grew up in Baltimore and now lives in New York City. His fun fact is that he likes to invest in real estate and also is an avid powerlifter. Next is Sujal. Sujal is the co-director of the Institute for Health Computing at the University of Maryland College Park. His research interests include computer graphics, virtual and augmented reality, spatial audio, computer game development, medical and scientific visualization, machine learning, and human motion understanding. Prior to joining the Institute, Sujal founded a video game company that is in the process of releasing a rapid action 3D platform. He earned his PhD and conducted postdoctoral research at the University of Maryland College Park here. He has contributed to several research projects that focus on human perception, simulation, and visualization of real-time planetary scale GIS, Geographic Information System data, nanoparticle simulation optimization, visual analysis of MRI scans of patients with traumatic brain injuries, mapping of changes in RNA's flexibility, and exploration tool for EEG datasets. His research has earned him 3 Best Paper Awards. Now, his fun fact is that when he was an undergraduate student, he represented UMD at national collegiate tournaments in martial arts, in Kung Fu and Wushu. He also competed nationally in Olympic-style weightlifting and was ranked 5th in the 2012 National Weightlifting Champions and Olympic Trials. A real-time traffic visualization application he helped create while working at Maryland in the CAT lab was used in President Obama's inauguration in 2008. And last but not least is Louis. Louis is the Chief Development, Louis DeCamilla is the Chief Development Officer at Bloom Sciences. a clinical stage central nervous system company leveraging the microbiome to develop novel therapies for certain central nervous system disorders, including rare pediatric epilepsies and ALS. Lewis is interested in the intersection of science and technology and is passionate about driving innovative science to develop new therapeutic options for patients in need. He has over 20 years in the biotech pharma world with experience ranging from drug discovery and first-in-human studies through pivotal phase 3 trials, drug approvals, and commercial launches. Lewis was previously vice president of biometrics at Regenex Bio, a company focused on developing gene therapies for rare diseases. Prior to Regenex Bio, Lewis was vice president of informatics at Vanda Pharmaceuticals, where he has been part of the founding team in 2003. His early experiences also include time in the pharmacogenetics department at Novartis. He holds a PhD in computer science from our department, where his doctoral thesis was on developing computational methods for drug discovery. And he also mentioned I was on his committee, which I vividly remember. He was a Howard Hughes Fellow and has a BS in both biology and computer science from Georgetown University and an MS in computer science from the University of Maryland. Now, I think with full respect for your fun facts, I really like his fun fact because it relates a lot to what our department, I think, has done really well over the years, which is when Lewis was an undergraduate at Georgetown University, he couldn't figure out how to get the degree that joined computer science and biology. And so it took the support of 2 department chairs together with deans and registrars to allow him to achieve that, which is quite impressive. It's something that I think nowadays we kind of take for granted, but it took a lot of effort to actually follow this path. And yeah, so that's it. So first I would like to welcome our panelists. So before I start asking some questions, and I also would like to encourage everybody in the audience to think about questions they would like to ask of the panelists. I found one thing as I was doing a bit of research to prepare for this panel, and I found a quote. I won't say who said this quote, but I think it exemplifies this panel and the role of computing in health. And the quote says, "I truly believe that one day soon we will be able to more accurately diagnose and treat diseases through the use of genetic and genomic technologies. And it is these patients that motivate my work." So I think this is a great introduction to our panel. So I'd like to start, maybe I'll now start from Lewis. My first question, and this will be for everyone on the panel I'd like to answer, how do you currently use computing to support and promote health?
Sure. No, thank you for the great introduction for myself and all my colleagues here. I mean, I think as we were discussing earlier, I think it's such a loaded question. It's almost everywhere I look in my job, in my history, it's everywhere. From applying it to building drug discovery engines, using large data sets to computationally try to predict new uses for old drugs or predict side effect profiles. Most commonly, I've used it for really trying to use data to drive innovation in clinical trials. So especially having worked a lot in rare diseases, a lot of times you're very limited in terms of the number of patients you can actually have. And so in those cases, the only way to really get kind of statistical confidence of learning if something works is really to start to collect more data and to model things. And, really I view this as we're using all the tools possible, especially if, many times it's bringing in AI and machine learning to actually come up with these models to help us develop new novel endpoints for clinical trials that, it actually has allowed us to get some drugs approved. So for example, if you're familiar with kind of the clinical trial space, a lot of times phase 3 trials, these pivotal trials are hundreds, if not thousands of patients. I worked on a program that was very data-driven in a rare disease that we had our pivotal trials were 84 patients and 20 patients. And the only way that was possible was actually by using machine learning, information visualization. You can read the FDA reviewer that he said he printed out actually our visualizations we made. Having worked with Ben Schneiderman here kind of motivated me for that. He printed out an individual patient visualization for all of our patients in our trial, deleted the section that he knew what treatment they were on, sat down with a cup of coffee, and clinically, as a physician, kind of reviewed and said, yes, I'm convinced this drug works. We also hit the statistics because of the data and coming up with those endpoints, but I think it's kind of widespread how it's applied. Probably go on and on, but.
Yeah. Thank you. Sujal?
So the way I use computation is mostly an analysis of either medical imaging or some time series imaging like EEG or something along that line, right? So one of the work I did was certain injuries are very easy to find out, but when there's a mild case of those injuries, it's very challenging to find. So I use structural spectral form to identify those mild cases of traumatic brain injuries. Also, did something very similar for EEG to find some pattern inside the time series data set. So, but that is how I used before. But recently, I've been looking around in the whole biofield in general, right? And there is a huge trend of using generative AI into tackling next generation of drug discovery process. And there has been like huge success in that area.
Thank you. Kash?
For me, I've actually never worked on the clinical side of healthcare. Most of my background's at the intersection of finance and healthcare. And starting two companies, the first one was focused on making sure that Americans are picking the right health plans throughout each year to make sure that them and their families are picking and getting access to the right care. So when you think about an American going through open enrollment who has like 40 or 50 plans to choose from, the actual care they receive is directly correlated to the type of plan they choose, the quality of doctors, the quality of the hospital, the quality of drugs they can get. The plan's really important. And so that was the first thing I was working on over the last 5 years. And then recently started our second company. And that one's focused on actually helping medical providers and hospitals submit the right documentation and paperwork to insurance companies so that patients can get reimbursed or they can get financially treated in the right way. And so in both of these different ways, it's like maybe a little bit of a unique answer to your question. But I've found in the work that we do that there's so much great clinical work that goes on, both in academic centers and on hospitals. But the average American who makes $50K a year household income, they're not really getting access to the right type of care that maybe other folks on the other end of the financial spectrum are getting. And so this work's really meaningful to me, having grown up in a family that is first generation American and has seen some of the ups and downs of the US healthcare system. And so there's a lot of like machine learning and automation that goes into what we do around getting hospitals reimbursed for the type of care that patients are getting, and looking forward to diving deeper into that in this discussion.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Luika,
So I'm going
you want to get a microphone? So it's just,
I'll switch because for me it's not computing so much as data, since I'm a data person. So I see data and computing sort of going in parallel. And the potential that I've been looking for is kind of repurposing data and finding new ways to use data that has been already collected. And I can think of, you mentioned the financial space in the health space. And I think in general, if we look at sort of financial data and financial ecosystems, there's a huge amount of data that's collected and just not used. And then the same thing if we're looking at public health data, for example. So with COVID, again, understanding how to effectively do messaging to understand what people were going through during the pandemic, and then getting effective messaging out to them. So it's a lot of, we've been looking at things like mobility data, we've been looking at employment-related data, and of course, incidents, disease incidents, and so on. So to me, from my work, I mean, it's all about sort of understanding where the data is, and then the computational methods. Certainly, I mean, you have to figure out some of the, innovative methods that you can apply to this.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, this is nice, and thank you for your answers. And I think, exactly as Akash is saying, sort of different from everybody else, but I think that's exactly kind of the point that I'm trying to bring here, that it isn't just the person who's discovering tumors with advanced computer science. It isn't just the person who's doing genetic tracing of SNPs or something like that to identify correlation with certain diseases, but it is the whole ecosystem where computing can have a role, and obviously data And I think it's, it is data, but you cannot analyze data without computers. And as the volumes increase of data, you need better computing to extract meaning from that. My second question to the panelists is, let me go to a question of how you got where you are. And I think that's in part Lewis's experience of trying to get here. So I'm not sure who wants to start first, but my question is, what was both your educational and then professional journey that brought you to this point, like actually to the work that you're doing today? I don't know who wants to start. I'll give you a choice now.
So I started as a computer graphics with a focus on computer graphics, right? And I moved to, I did few work on MRI visualization, EAG visualization, and also a lot of perception-based projects. But when I went out to make a 3D game, that's when I realized like how much computation you need. Computation for AI, computation for simulating physics, computation for just a plain graphic visualization, right? And the worst thing that took most of my time in that development process is just numerical precision. When you have to handle those kind of situations, it's a lot of things that you have to do to make certain things work, like not just theory, but in terms of numerical processing too, right? So, and then when I had that, when I got into that experience and also system building experience, and now I see like there's something, I can do something very similar in the healthcare and then in healthcare related.
For me, growing up as a first generation Indian American, my parents made it very clear growing up that like being a doctor was like the highest calling. And I have a bit of a funny story where in the 9th grade, I was looking to learn more about being a doctor. So I volunteered at the local hospital where I grew up, which was Johns Hopkins. And as a high schooler on day one, you come in and they gave us a flashcard to write down the 3 departments that we wanted to work in and ranking. Number 1 for me was neurology. It was the study of the brain. I was fascinated by the brain. Number 2 was cardiology, and 3, I put pediatrics. And I showed up on my first day, and they thought that they gave me my top pick. They actually gave me urology instead of neurology. And for anybody that doesn't know urology is the study of the, at the time, the male reproductive system. And so as a 9th grader, I was put into a department that I actually didn't enjoy that much. And so very quickly I realized that the clinical side of healthcare wasn't that exciting to me. But this was also around the time where I was starting to nerd out about like software and building computers and playing games. And so long story short, I realized that healthcare was very exciting to me and technology was really exciting to me. And so when I came to the University of Maryland, studying computer science and surrounding myself by more like healthcare related classes was something that just became more and more of an area of passion. And that's why I decided to focus my career on health tech.
Thank you. Luis or Luika?
So without revealing my age, when I was getting a PhD and also an undergraduate degree, I was in an EE program because there wasn't a computer science program. But I think in the end, it really doesn't matter. I think you just follow your interests and your passion. And then I've always been very collaborative in terms of working. And I also sort of, like listening to people around or just reading about things and so on, I get a lot of ideas, not from necessarily scientific papers or scientific research, but just from looking around and looking at problems that need to be solved. And then figuring out, okay, how do I build a team and then figure out sort of the right computational and data needs to solve that problem.
Thank you.
Test. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess in my intro, heard a little bit about it, but I guess, I mean, looking back, I've just always been interested in understanding how things work and solving problems in general. I mean, as a little kid, I loved, you can't do it these days, but just like taking apart electronics and figuring out things work and trying to modify it and figure things out. So I say I've always been interested in science and technology, and growing up, I kind of just viewed it as the same things. I just loved learning about things, how they worked, and solving problems and modifying things. Going back to high school, similar, interned in the hospital setting and kind of viewed learning the technology, because in many ways, and I try to teach this even to my teams now, in many ways, the basics of technology and in many things in industry, it's almost like you're segmenting people from data if they don't have some basic understanding. And so going into healthcare, going into clinical development, I mean, the way big pharma works is you have people that understand the disease very well. And then in many big companies, you have multiple layers of people that they have to ask a question for someone to program something, to learn about their own data. And I feel like so much is lost in translation. And so I've just kind of always been interested in more the science side, but I think have always wanted to pick up these new tools to help fulfill that. So I don't think I ever actively wanted to learn both. It was just kind of following my interest and kind of learning things to fill in the gaps as I moved along.
Thank you. To follow up on that, I didn't know if I should ask now or later, but what role do you think Maryland has had in bringing you where you are today? Like, oh, especially our department, of course, but Maryland in general, I think.
Sure, happy to follow. So yeah, I mean, I think when I was interested in looking for a PhD program, I mean, in many ways it was even with, finding my potential advisor, so Lise Couture, who's, not here anymore, but that was a large motivation for me. And part of it was, even though it was not her main focus, she was more purely machine learning and all these graphical models and everything else, she had done some research kind of crossing over into the biospace. And I think when I came here, had full support, I think, from the department in terms of what I was doing for my PhD and really doing something different and applying, kind of developing these novel methods to real data, which is what pulled me kind of back into industry as I was finishing up my coursework. I had the opportunity to actually get real kind of industry data and use it for my dissertation. So I think, that openness, that flexibility, really pushing that cross-functional, not just between these spaces, but really completely cross-functional across many different kind of domains, I think was key. Doesn't hurt that it was, one of the top programs for purely computer science as well.
Thank you.
I'll say that when I was looking for a computer science school to go to, I realized that computer science is one of those very theoretical majors where you can learn pretty deep algorithms and design and architecture in the classroom. But sometimes taking that and applying it outside the classroom can be pretty difficult, at least at most traditional top computer science schools. But the one thing that attracted me to Maryland that later came true and now has, in my opinion, greatly impacted me is the entrepreneurship culture on campus. I think Maryland was ranked top 15 entrepreneurship schools in the country, ranking behind the Stanfords of the world. And now it's it feels even higher, but I feel like that encouragement to do things beyond the classroom as an undergrad student allowed me to tinker with things in ways that you can't do elsewhere. That coupled with things like the hackathon or even Startup Shell with a very big startup culture. Those sort of things really allow you to shape the way that you go through as a student when you're young, and now being out in the real world, I take a lot of the same learnings that I feel like I took from campus to what I'm doing now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Wonderful.
So for me, I was living in Rockville at that time, so I was very familiar with this area, and then I also knew a lot of my friends here in computer science department. There were students back then, and also there was a martial art class I used to go to, and all of my friends were there. So I just came here. Natural progression.
Should I be scared of you?
No. I don't practice no more.
Yeah.
So I have obviously a different perspective since I came here as not as a student, but as a professor. And I think, so one thing was the collaborative culture. There were really sort of open doors in terms of people teaming up and wanting to help each other and knowledge sharing and so on. So that was really something that I appreciated. And, I think we still have that. And I think going back to what you said about entrepreneurship, so sitting in the business school and also just looking across campus, I think we've really developed that in very interesting ways through whether it's BitCamp or Startup Shell or the Hatchery or Technica. And I mean, there's just all of these activities, and yes, I think we do rival the top tech schools. And I think we've done a good job in terms of accessibility and trying to look for diversity in those spaces so that it's not very sort of dominant with certain parts of society. So I think that's really a strong selling point.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was going to follow because I keep getting the same exact vibe from everybody, and also the way I feel is that the diversity of opportunities that are being provided here and diversity of people you encounter that plays a big role in allowing people to kind of chart a path that they want, and obviously that's quite amazing in the healthcare space where I'm very interested, but in many other areas. So I want to maybe shift a little bit to a question about kind of where we should be going, right? So that's the so we've talked about kind of how you got here, where you are, but what do you see as perhaps the biggest gap? And gap is very broadly defined, but in the computational or data infrastructure for supporting health. Again, everything is generally defined, as you can see. Each of the panelists has a different perspective on health.
So, not many might know about Institute for Health Computing. So it's a new institute that we are forming here in the University of Maryland College Park, right? It's in the Institute for Health Computing, we're trying to use computation to solve a lot of these health-related problems. We're gonna create, deploy, and then also test it in the real-world settings. So we have seen, we have gone around to various companies, and we have like looked around like various conferences, trying to pinpoint some things that we have to do, right? One is to like make data accessible to a lot of research community, and also at the same time to be able to use that for large language model processing kind of environment. Because right now the data is very fragmented. Like one hospital system will not talk to another hospital system, and even inside one system there isn't a coherent way of sharing data from one devices to another devices. So data sharing is one part, and also there has especially drug community is seeing a big impact based on generative AI. So last conference I went to, they were very excited about this drug called in silico 1855. That one is the first drug like fully generated by AI. So the target was selected by AI, and then also the potential compound is selected using generative AI, and then right now in clinical phase 2. So, but still, like the applying AI into like a medical setting is still hard, right? And then I think as we bridge the gap between medicine and computer science and have like a interdisciplinary more classes interdisciplinary in that way, like I think we will get that will be a next way to in the future.
Thanks. Sujal talked about how like hospitals, it's very hard for them to share data with one another. The problem that we're focused on, which is automating like the billing side, we realize that even within one single hospital or one single medical institution, data is oftentimes very hard to share, where most of these big hospital systems have like 4 or 5 big systems of record inside of just their 4 walls. So they have an EHR, the electronic health record system, which is where all the visit data lives. There's typically a patient demographic data lake. There's a billing accounting system. There's another system where all the drug data lives. And for us to be able to come in and actually do what we do, one of the things that we've done is come in and build a data infrastructure that connects into these 4 or 5 big domains of data and brings them into one place. And now that we've done that across like a lot of our customers, we're looking to figure out how to share that between different hospitals. That's the first thing I think we need to figure out in the next like 10 years is more broadly, how do we take the whole country's health data and bring that to a medium where it's very easily accessible by those that need it. I think 10 years ago it was very hard because of all the different HIPAA rules and people being very cagey about the data. But now that there's more interoperability and more democracy around how health data should be handled, I think the tech needs to catch up to it. And then the second thing, and this is less of a technical answer, but I think the billing model in healthcare needs to change as well. It's always been fee for service where doctors get paid by providing more services. And more recently, things have been shifting to what's known as value-based care, where doctors are now getting reimbursed based off of healthy outcomes. And I think that needs to be more ubiquitous, but we're probably on like inning 2 of 9 to get there. But we've seen some early adopters adopt value-based care, and my company is focused on helping the actual providers implement that infrastructure for the first time.
Thank you.
I also think we should be eating healthier too, as a country.
Yes. I apologize for the lunch you had then.
So maybe I can answer that from a little bit of a educational perspective and also a research perspective. And I've sort of, as an educator and as a researcher, I've always worked now for 30 years in multidisciplinary, so whether it's biologists or finance people, economists, etc. And I think there's, disciplinarity is good, but then getting to the multidisciplinarity, I mean, sometimes it's as simple as the terminology is different, but there's a lot of barriers there in terms of getting us to work well together. And I think we really need to think about how we can lower those barriers, whether it's students wanting to get these degrees or just in terms of how knowledge gets transferred. And I think the other part I see is that there's interoperability and so on, but there's also this gap of, as technology and knowledge becomes more powerful, integrating and teaching people. So industry is so far ahead right now in terms of certain things, and we can't even begin to teach those things in the classroom because there's just no way to create those environments. So we have to start, I think, thinking about also how to, and this is not saying, don't do that, but trying to figure out ways in which we can bridge those gaps.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I think you heard from a couple of the panel members, trying to pull in data, whether it's within one organization or especially across organizations. I think that's a complex challenge, and I think something we're making headway on. But one thing is there's all these other parallel challenges, because it's not just the data, it's figuring out not just the privacy and security, but the IP, especially when you're trying to get industry to do it. So there's all these kind of parallel challenges that even make combining the data even more complex. But one thing, especially, more on the clinical development side, is sometimes you're also hampered by kind of regulatory agencies and precedents in what you can do. So, you can apply the fanciest AI model and learn something very interesting, but you actually need to have something that's one, can be explained, and 2, that's predictive. So like when you're approving a new drug, you have to give explicit directions. So it's what we know as the label of a drug. What that really is, it's a description, it's instructions for how a physician can use that drug. And it needs to be how they can treat that patient, not having access to the rest of your data. So if you have some fancy model that actually you have to run together with all the other data you have behind the scenes, that's not something that can translate to a physician. It's not something that the FDA or EMA or anyone else is going to look. So I think as we move forward, we want to use the best science to develop things in parallel, but it's finding that balance of how you can actually transcribe that into something that is actionable, that is explainable, is an additional challenge that I think we need to keep working on.
Thank you. We all need more data, right? And better data. Yes?
Always.
Sujal.
Let me ask a very specific question. You mentioned generative AI to generate a specific drug molecule, correct?
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk about a hypothetical problem which is very contained, well defined, but very impossible right now. Suppose you needed to take a person's DNA. You can take that person's DNA and use that DNA to regenerate a well-defined part of their body, such as a pituitary gland, if they had it removed, let's say surgically, and then implant it in the right place, in this case, in the head. Right? That's a very difficult problem. I think it's plain to see that someday it will be possible. or very difficult. How, my question is, how do we push along a solution towards that path, either by like a centralized funding model such as, there was a talk about quantum computing where it's been centrally funded for like 30 plus years, or like nuclear fusion where it's been centrally funded for 50 plus years. Or alternatively, how do we get a free market solution to push towards solving that sort of problem? Because you, sir, are in the computational health field. This would be a very difficult computational health research problem, extremely well defined, certainly possible in principle, very difficult. How could we push in that direction, and what economic or governmental models could lend towards pushing in that direction with an institute?
So it's a
So,
very good
Joel,
question.
can I ask you just repeat the gist of the question for the people online because they might not have heard that?
So the question is, how do you, like the problem that you just defined, right? Like how would you come up with a certain like funding model or certain way to solve that grand challenge, right? Yeah. So it's a very exciting problem that you just mentioned, and I think we can look at it in by breaking down the problem into smaller parts, right? And certain parts simulation can help. Certain part might be close to something else in, I'm not an expert in that area, but a certain part might be close to certain other, like in biology, there might be something going on in the biology, or like they might be already using generative AI in biology to learn something, right? So maybe if we can figure these smaller components out, right? And then see how they are how they are working on these things together. Maybe, and once we learn those things and then research a little bit on that area, maybe we can work on that grand challenge.
Yeah, but if I also maybe, because I think this opens up a very interesting question of how how industry and government work together to promote health, right? Like essentially, what role do you think entrepreneurship has? And you have both studied companies, right? So you know the challenges on your side about how to raise money and so on. And then I guess we're acutely aware of how you raise money from the federal government, and that's also a challenge on that side. Like, how do you see both funding from the federal government, but also entrepreneurial activities help promote and help us address these very, very important questions in the healthcare system? I mean, the challenge that you pose there is extremely interesting. How you go from DNA to create a bespoke organ for a person, right? Like, what if we did, instead of kidney transplants where we need a donor, we just build a kidney for the patient, right? And that's definitely a grand challenge. But getting the resources to put together the teams to achieve that is going to be challenging. So
let me address this not from the technology viewpoint, but I think he was also asking, how do you put these things together?
It's a policy question, right?
Well, so I think NSF just has a new program called APTO, where they're trying to understand where investments have paid off in terms of predicting where technology has moved, those shifts. And, there's now a lot of knowledge. And so we can apply AI to this problem to figure this out. So that's one interesting thing. And I think then we also have to think of sort of synergistically and also the things that pay off that we didn't understand. So if you look at, Kariko's Nobel Prize that was just announced this week, right? And at Penn, when she was doing this work, 4 times she was demoted because they said she wasn't doing full professor level research. Now, I don't know how they did that evaluation. And yes, I think, at the time, the type of, pathways and so on that she was studying in the immunogenetics, I mean, I understand that nobody saw that, this would be, I mean, so understanding the big picture is often hard, but I think we have to make sure that, all of these things even though we don't know how it can be applied in the future, that there's a pathway for people to follow their passion and be very successful at what they do. So that's not a centralized model, because in her case, that centralized model tried to
Failed.
defeat her.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So
Louis?
maybe I'll just kind of come back to this question and say, I think it's an awesome grand challenge we should strive for, but I think we need to figure out not how to solve that, but what are little bite-sized research things that we can do that might apply to more things that could bring in other funding or other collaboration to get there. So I do think, for example, gene therapy, not quite building full organs, but it's now becoming, you're starting to see individual gene therapies being developed for individual people. And this is something that wouldn't have been possible if there weren't larger gene therapy programs that have kind of set the groundwork for slightly larger, but many times still rare diseases, and developing the vectors that are used, developing the overall safety of these things, and now just learning how to modify them. So, I mean, that the gene therapy kind of goes back to Penn, a lot of it as well, which is, I only know, I mean, at Regenix Bio, we were co-founded out of the AAV technology that came out of Penn. And that's something that's taken 20 years to get to where we are now, but now you're seeing actually patient advocacy groups raising funding to bring their own programs forward. But a lot of it has also relied on this cross-functional, a large push with advocacy, with regulators to actually set the stage for what does it take to take something that you now have some basics of understanding the vector and swap in a new gene based on actually figuring out what that person's DNA is. So I think we're starting to see some of that, but I think we need to figure out, well, is there something simpler that we can tackle, or maybe not simpler, something that applies to a much larger audience that might bring in that funding. And so, as Regenix Bio as an example, largely rare diseases, we had 4 programs in rare diseases, very small markets, but part of what moved us forward and brought in funding for a lot of that is we had a large program for gene therapy for wet AMD, much larger market, but all our learnings there actually pushed all our other programs forward. So I think it's something awesome to strive for, but I think we need to figure out, what are the earlier building blocks of smaller research that gets us a step there, and figure out if that can bring in other funding as well.
Can I add a little more to it? Yeah. So I just remember, like, the United Therapeutics here in Silver Spring, they just did they grow a heart in their lab somewhere in North Carolina, and they did a heart transplant one last year, and then they recently did it 2 weeks ago, I think. Yeah, in Baltimore. I think you can see a lot of parallels there and what you just mentioned. So if you look into United Therapeutics, how they went about doing that, like you might be able to find more information.
You've increased my appreciation.
Thanks. Yeah, so if I can share a microphone here.
So I may be the only one here who's actually a practicing physician, and I'm listening very carefully to what you're saying, and I'm trying to translate it into where the rubber hits the road, in my view. And one of the things that you're talking about is implementation, right? I mean, you're interested in how do we implement some of these very innovative things. You probably don't want to hear this, but one of the biggest barriers to entry until fairly recently, what do you think was the biggest barrier to entry for information technology in the practicing physician community? I don't want to take a guess. Barrier to entry. What would that be? You want to hear a guess? I'll tell you what it was.
Cost of compliance.
What was it?
Cost of compliance. All the extra.
No, nothing like that. Most doctors don't have keyboard skills. They can't use it. Okay, so when our hospital, it's Fairfax Hospital, and also Johns Hopkins, when they implemented our electronic health record, it was a big boom rollout. In other words, on one given day was Epic, which you're probably familiar with, and on a given day, Epic was going to be instituted. And if you weren't going to come in and take 18 hours of training on Epic, you no longer had your active staff privileges. And a lot of doctors gave up their active staff privileges. They just couldn't do it. Okay, that is now changing. Okay, as people that are graduating medical school do have keyboard skills, and they are they are IT capable, okay, and they think in terms of IT. But until fairly recently, that was really an impossible sell. Combine that with the fact that right now there is an endemic anti-science mentality. You know that, okay? And we see that with the COVID vaccine. The COVID vaccine is absolutely a miracle. I mean, it goes down with the discovery of penicillin and insulin, okay? And yet we have a systemic resistance to application of the COVID vaccine, okay, and application of science in general. There really is an anti-science mentality out there. So you're kind of facing that also. So the other thing that I wanted to share with you is, if a clinician is looking at an IT application, what is he or she going to be interested in? Will it save time? Will it save money? Will it reduce risk? Will it increase outcome, particularly for public health purposes? But basically, and as far as saving money, in the value model, will it save money? But in the traditional fee-for-service model, will it make money, right? So that's kind of what we're facing right now, okay? You talk about a value-based model. I mean, I've had experience with both of them, okay? A value-based model, some people will say, well, that's kind of a euphemism, because with the fee-for-service model, the more you do, the more you make. But with a value-based model, the less you do, the more satisfied, the more you flourish within the system, or maybe get the incentives. And yet the practicing physician, he's faced with everybody that provides service for him is fee-for-service, the electrician, the plumber, the nurse, so on and so forth. So, I mean, where the rubber hits the road, you're really up against some more fundamental issues, starting with keyboard skills and cost. I just kind of wanted to share that with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Any response to that?
Do you want to respond? Then we also have a couple more questions from the audience. I also want to say that I'm terrified of the fact that doctors not only cannot write by hand, but cannot type. So.
I cannot type.
So maybe one follow-on to this is, these barriers, but I think we're also seeing that because of software itself being a barrier, there are lots of small single physician offices that are closing down or joining up with others simply because they can't deal with the overheads involved in putting in these information systems and so on. And I think that is going to be a loss for us in terms of changing the business model for where individual physicians are not able to practice independently. So that's another unintended consequence of the good thing of saying, make everything online,
An independent
But I think
practice.
there's some question.
So, sorry for coming in. But I have two related questions. I know in Montgomery County there was a rather recent announcement that there's a new data center partnership with the University of Maryland.
Yeah, that's Sujal is the co-director.
Okay.
For health computing.
Okay. And then, is there any plans to increase the amount of bio and computer science courses that are offered? Because I know only at undergrad right now we just have bioinformatics, and with this new data center, obviously, I guess you're using AI or something like that to do detection of diseases. Is there going to be more? Is there plans for more undergraduate courses?
So we are planning on a few courses down the line, but right now we're just setting up the institution. Yeah. So we will try to figure out which areas are more interesting to students and computer scientists, right? And then we'll try to create more classes.
And I would say we do have some of the faculty in computational biology in the room who are teaching undergraduate courses. So we are building the critical mass to teach more. I have another question.
While you're waiting for that question, I can say I've been spending about the past 2 years trying to put together this computational finance minor and there's a huge amount of overhead involved because our bureaucracies we're very siloed in the university, and when you're in different units, it's very difficult to get these things. So I understand your pain, but we face a lot of pain also in trying to put these programs together.
Thank you. That was a great question.
So this is more on the entrepreneurial side. So from my understanding, a big part of like the healthcare system in the US is like extreme cost. And I was wondering, for people who want to like do a startup, so like there's GoodRx, and that's like focused on like coupons for prescriptions. But if someone like is interested in like lowering costs for patients, what are the biggest barriers to doing that if you're just like a CS student and like you're familiar with tech, but like what stops you from, I guess, making that software solution to save people money?
I guess Akash, you're probably you've done it, right?
Yeah, I would say, in terms of like ideating around like problems that you can solve, one of the things that I found to be helpful when I was first graduating and looking to start something was surrounding myself in an environment where I would be surrounded by a lot of problems. And for me, the lowest hanging fruit was to join another company that was in the space I was passionate about, learn about how they're tackling a problem, and get entrenched with different things that exist in the space. One of the most looked down upon like paths or people that talk like looked down upon it after graduating is going down like the consulting route, like working at a big four like a McKinsey or a Deloitte or a Bain. And while like I personally wouldn't want to work there for 10 plus years, I feel like as a new grad, and we hire a lot of people that have spent a couple years there, you're exposed to a lot of different problems in a lot of different domains of healthcare. And I feel like going down that, if you don't have an idea to pursue, can be really helpful. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I've always been a big believer that the idea is the easy part and the execution is a lot harder. And execution takes a little bit of like risk taking. It takes a little bit of grit, and also just being really, really focused on what you want to build. And so I think there's a lot of great ideas. People have them. You hear about them all the time. But taking the leap of faith of actually going and trying to approach that and tackle that, that's the harder part. And so I don't think any of the ideas that I pursued or even some of my other entrepreneurial friends have been necessarily like novel, like insane ideas. They're pretty straightforward ideas, just with a really great team, really great attitude, and a lot of drive and hustle.
And just I guess expanding, is regulation a problem? Like government regulation to like, is that a barrier to entry possibly?
It can be, but I also think that regulation sometimes can be a competitive advantage, where if you figure out a regulation in a way nobody else does, then you've built a better competitive moat. Not healthcare, but one example is Airbnb, for example. Airbnb seems like a pretty simple idea, but they have a really deep regulation team. They've gone to every big city in the country and have negotiated ways to offer short-term rentals in ways that the hotel industry hasn't been able to figure out. Or if you think about Uber, Uber actually had a really difficult time operating in New York City, for example. New York City taxi cab drivers spend millions of dollars on the medallions where they insure those cabs. And now most of those taxi cab driver companies have actually shut down. And so I think regulation, sometimes people use it as like a barrier to entry. I think about it as a competitive advantage. I know your mom's a lawyer, so she can help you with that.
Thank you.
So I'll add on to the bit about working with, spending some time at a consulting company. I think you want to choose it a little bit carefully, because I think certain percentage of it is kind of spin and there's not that much learning, but hopefully you'll find a part of the group that is actually in bed with some company and figuring out how all of their problems and trying to solve it. So when I hear back from some of our business students, some of them, I mean, I'll see them 10 years later and I can see how much they've learned in that period. So I think you want to be very careful in terms of choices, but that is a good path to follow.
Yeah.
And I'll just add real quickly. I mean, I'd definitely push when you have the time and the flexibility without a commitment. I mean, when you're an undergrad or grad student, I mean, go get involved, get an internship, do something else. It's a way to really see the nuts and bolts of the problems they have and get really up to speed. And maybe, if you do that earlier, less of a commitment to having to maybe do it longer term. And that's how I got my start, was from kind of just an introduction when I was an undergrad to go meet the folks at Novartis, and left there and went to just meet them and left there kind of with an internship that kind of started me into the industry path. So I think definitely see what's out there.
Thank you. So I want to kind of probably end with one last question, which is kind because a number of you have brought this up of various disparities in the healthcare system. And my question is, how can technology help address the very broadly health disparities that exist in the current system?
What do you mean by health disparities?
Well, I think I'll allow you to perhaps define them a little better based on what your experiences are. But there are a lot of there's a lot of differences in how care is provided based on your gender, based on where you grew up, based on even rural versus urban environments and so on. So I think there's a lot of perhaps a lot of opportunities to do better, right? In all areas in terms of supporting everybody. So the question is, how is technology really playing a role in that goal? I know there's a lot more than technology. There's the societal challenges that we have to address.
I can go on. So disparities are usually age, race, gender, economic, socioeconomic status, and something like that, right? So we have to look at from two different areas. One from like a healthcare point of view, right? Other one from like emerging AI, like how it is being used in healthcare, right? So for like health industry and hospitals, most of them already have certain ways to mitigate these disparities, right? But the way they are using AI and the computation and data science to like help them is what they do is they implement certain strategies in their community and then see what worked and what didn't work, right? And then they adapt these strategies based on the real-time data they get. But in terms of using AI, because AI, like when you use AI to find certain disease or like or to create a compound, right? Most of it depends on how you collect the data. And if the data is not representative of the entire population, or if the data is drifting over time based on how you collect, then it can not only just it can even exaggerate disparities that come when it comes up to like certain results, right? So we have to for that we have to figure out a way or even create a test bed to see how we evaluate and how we explain the outcome of the AI.
Thank you.
So I think a lot of it sometimes even goes back to the original clinical research in terms of what's being studied, what the populations are being studied, and many times, unless you're proactively doing something, a lot of times, for example, participating in a clinical trial, especially if it is for a rare or complex disease, you might only have these certain centers of excellence across the country. If you're a family that doesn't have the means for one parent to actually fly them to a children's hospital somewhere, you're not participating in the clinical trial. So I think trying to figure out how you can get more involvement when you can lower the barrier to entry. I do think the pandemic did help that way in terms of pushing a lot of decentralized clinical trials and technology. So I do think we're starting to see some of those challenges, but it is a balance because it is a complex topic. You want to learn, but you also don't want to try to make things perfectly explainable for every single person from day one. Otherwise, you might never move that product forward. So I think it is finding that balance of learning, making sure you are trying to lower the barrier to entry, but continue to learn, especially even kind of post-approval. And I think that will translate into what's being put into practice down the road as well.
Thank you.
From my perspective, at least on problems that I've worked on, one big source of disparity is around benefit literacy. Like how well do people understand the type of care they can get access to? And you can be lower on the financial scale and you might have like Medicare or Medicaid or something through an employer. And people think, oh, I have Medicare through Maryland. It must be a pretty shitty plan. Actually, Maryland's Medicare program and even most states, it's a pretty robust set of offerings. But it's so hard to understand it just given the amount of literature you need to go through to figure out what's covered. So I think that's number one, is giving people that need the literacy they need to go get the care they must get. The second thing is that a lot of like tools and resources and even companies out there that can help reduce the cost of care. I think you mentioned GoodRx. Sometimes there's prescriptions out there that are thousands of dollars with the plan that you have, but some of these tools like GoodRx or others, you can get them down to less than $100. And so understanding that. And then the third thing is around more price transparency around the care that you get. I think healthcare has been one of those things where you really don't know how much you're going to pay for something before you're going to go get it, which is like really surprising. If I wanted to go get an oil change right now, I'd probably call the 3 local mechanics around me, and they would all quote me a price on the phone. But that's never really existed in healthcare. But now there's more companies out there that use the power of machine learning and historical claim data to give a layman like myself access to what I can pay for an MRI or a CAT scan or whatever it might be. And so I think there's plenty of examples of that, but I think at the end of the day, it's giving people the literacy and getting them excited enough to care about their health.
Thank you.
So
Marika, last.
I'll use long COVID as an example because I think there's a large community of people who are facing long COVID symptoms. And I think they're kind of going online and sharing a lot of information, and they're sort of solving this problem for themselves. And I think technology has really enabled that. So I think that's a success story that we could use maybe to try to apply that to solve other issues also.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. We are out of time. Thank you so much to the panelists. And hopefully you can continue some of these discussions in a more informal way after the panel. And thanks to all of you for attending.